أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين باعث الأنبياء والنبيين ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وبشر الصابرين الذين إذا أصابتهم مصيبة قالوا إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. صلوات بر محمد صلى الله على محمد وعجل فرجه. Respected Mu'mineen and Mu'minat, dear brothers and sisters, in many parts of the world, the moon of Muharram has been sighted. And yet another season of mourning and commemoration, grief and remembrance, passion and bravery is upon us. Yet again we have this opportunity to recall, commemorate and remember the epic events on the dusty plains of Karbala that occurred 1400 years ago. And from that, seek some light to push back the darkness that seems to always gnaw at us. Inshallah, this year's Muharram, that the first Ashra, the first 10 days in particular, inshallah we will engage in a discussion and a conversation that will hopefully earn the pleasure of our Imam and provide us some guiding light to help us make our lives and live our lives in the way that we ought to and the way that our Imam would like us to. Thank you for the introduction, dear brother. I remember those years back in 2004 and 5 when we used to have these classes. It was a very small group and it was on weekends only, I think, only on Saturday or Sunday, I don't recall. But they were very, very pleasant hours that we spent together, and I still remember them. And I hope to see the other, well, they were kids at that time, and now, mashallah, you all are all grown up. I'm also very, very honored to see the elders who are present here today. I recognize some of them. I'm very happy to see them. It has been a long time since I had the honor of seeing you all and meeting you all, inshallah, during these nights, inshallah. I hope to catch up with the elders here. I see many familiar faces. They're a little different. 17 years changes just about everybody. But they're looking more radiant and resplendent than they used to 17 years ago. It's nice to be back here once again. And it's nice to engage in this conversation with the Mu'mineen here. So this season of mourning and remembrance, of commemoration is upon us once again. And perhaps it would be correct to say that each and every country in the world, each and every major settlement, human settlement in the world today, any major city, I think we can probably safely guess that there must be in each of these places at least some people whose lives and whose routine will change from tonight, or perhaps from tomorrow, depending on where they are located. In some cases, it may be a single individual. It may be a single individual. And so when we are here today, gathered in this hall, it's not a very large place, it's not a very large gathering. Our small numbers, our small location, our small gathering in a small country in Southeast Asia is in fact part of a much larger phenomenon, part of a much grander scheme of things. As I mentioned, I doubt if there is any country in the world or any major settlement in the world which is entirely devoid of any individual whose life will not be transformed and changed from tonight. Let me give you an example. There was a time when I used to travel frequently to Vietnam. And on one of these trips, I met a lover of the Ahl Bayt, a mu'min, in Vietnam. And at that time, it was remarkable to find somebody living in Vietnam who is Shia. Very remarkable. I don't know what the situation is right now, but at that time, it was very, very remarkable. He lived there. He spoke fluent Vietnamese. He was originally from Pakistan, but he had left Pakistan at a very young age and lived a very difficult life in various countries and then finally settled down in Vietnam, married a local Muslim lady and started a family. If this wasn't remarkable enough, when we got talking, he told me of some time that he had spent in Tibet, because he had lived in different countries. Apparently, he had spent a couple of years in a small town in Tibet, a town which had no other Muslim. To reach the nearest Muslim, you had to drive several hours to be able to see another Muslim. And he told me that during that period that he was in Tibet, as you know, Tibet is this cold, dry, very elevated, sparsely populated plateau lying very close to India, which is where I belong to. In that part of the world, he said that I used to keep track of the lunar calendar because I used to eagerly await the arrival of Muharram. And when I figured out that tonight is the night of the commencement of the month of Muharram, a night just like tonight, I would start walking out of the town. It was a small town. In a couple of minutes, I'd be out of the town. And then I would go out in that cold, dark night. It's very dry there, so there are no clouds, bright starlight. And I would spend a couple of hours all by myself in that cold desert, recalling every noha, every marsiya that I know from my childhood. And I would recite it to myself. There was nobody else. There was no gathering. There was nobody who was listening. But this is something that he did for that period of time. Truly remarkable. And which is why I said that it is probably safe to guess and to claim that there must scarcely be any major settlement or any country in the world that is devoid of these gatherings, or if not a gathering, of a single individual who is able to keep alive the memory of Muharram and of Karbala in such extraordinary ways. So our small numbers here may be small in context of the population of this country and of this city in comparison to that. But when we consider that we are connected with a phenomenon that covers the expanse of this earth, that covers the expanse of humanity itself, then we feel and we realize that we are in fact part of something huge, something very important, something very meaningful and significant. And it's just not geographically that we are part of something enormous. If we look at the expanse of time as well, we are here today in the year 2023, the year 1445 by the Islamic calendar. And we are here as the most recent and latest link in a chain that begins way back in the 61st year of Hijrah. According to our tradition, the commemoration of the martyrdom of Karbala, mourning ceremonies, these were established by Hazrat Zainab bint Ali, Aqilatu Bani Hashim herself. She is, according to our tradition, the first individual to hold a mourning ceremony in Dimashq, in Damascus itself, before she returned to Karbala and then later on to Medina. So we are part of a very, very old institution. An institution that was begun by the household of the Prophet itself and was carried on by subsequent imams and other holy figures of this family. The fourth imam in his own ways, the fifth and the sixth imam, the seventh, and so on. By way of an example, let me just narrate one incident here. When our eighth imam, Imam Raza alayhi salatu wassalam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. When our eighth imam had been forced into that difficult position of accepting the vice regency of Ma'mun, and he had been forced to move from Medina to Marv, which is a small set of ruins today in Turkmenistan. And he was now, in the eyes of many people, part of this immense government setup, something which he did not like at that time. This is something that he was forced into doing. At that time, many people would come to see him and meet him. One of these meetings, which has been recorded in our books, is where a famous poet by the name of De'bal Khuzai. De'bal is a lover of the Ahl Bayt, a follower of the Ahl Bayt, and he comes to see Imam Raza in Marv. He comes and sees him. Imam Raza recognizes him, knows him, welcomes him warmly. And De'bal is a poet. He's a sha'ir. So he recites poetry for Imam Raza. It is a famous qasida known as Qasida Ta'iyya. More than 70 verses of it have been preserved in Arabic. And in that, it's a long story. When De'bal recites this verse, Imam Raza gives this reaction. When he says this, Imam Raza responds in a certain way. I will not get into those details. But there is a certain verse which is very interesting. When recounting and reciting and remembering the trials and tribulations of the Ahlul Bayt, De'bal recites this verse. He says, وَقَبْرٌ بِبَغْدَادٍ لِنَفْسٍ زَكِيَّةٍ. There is a grave in Baghdad for a holy soul that belongs to a holy soul. He is speaking of Imam Raza's holy father. Imam Musa is in Baghdad. Kazumain is a part of Baghdad. وَقَبْرٌ بِبَغْدَادٍ لِنَفْسٍ زَكِيَّةٍ تَزْمِنُهَا الرَّحْمَنِ فِي الْغُرُفَاتِ. There is a holy soul, and the Rahman, the bounteous Allah, secures and provides security to this soul in the rooms and the chambers of heaven. When Imam Raza hears this, he says, I would like to add a few verses here. And he goes on to add these few verses. For those of you who have been to Mashhad, may have seen these verses. These are inscribed in several parts of the Haram. And those of you who haven't, inshallah, may Allah give you the opportunity at the earliest. Imam Raza adds a couple of verses there. And he says, وَقَبْرٌ بِطُوسٍ يَا لَهَا مِن مُصِيبَةٍ. And there is a grave in Tus, a tragic grave in Tus. أَلَحَّتْ عَلَى الْأَحْشَاءِ بِالْحَرَقَاتِ. A grave, the remembrance of which constantly sets our insides and innards on fire. إِلَى الْحَشْرِ حَتَّى يَبْعَثَ اللَّهُ قَائِمًا يُفَرِّجُ عَنَّا الْغَمَّ وَالْكُرُبَاتِ. And this sense of loss, this sense of being on fire when we think of this grave, Imam Raza is speaking of his own grave. Imam Raza in his own life, before his martyrdom, is speaking of his own grave, which will be in Tus. And he said the memory of that grave and the memory of the person who is buried in that grave, that is himself, he's speaking about the future, will always cause discomfort to the Ahl Bayt and their followers till the day that the Qa'im appears, and the Qa'im then removes the grief and the trials and tribulations from the Ahl Bayt and their followers. When this happens, and he has added these verses to this qasida, he then signals to his servant to go inside and get something. The servant returns with a bag of 100 gold coins, 100 gold coins, which, because at that time Imam Raza had been made the vice regent, carried the name of Imam Raza himself. The government had minted these coins. And these were very precious coins, and he gifts this sack or this small bag of coins to De'bal Khuzai. De'bal is horrified. He refuses to accept these coins. He says that, "Oh my master, this is not why I came here. This is not why I recited these verses for you." This was a time when Imam Raza is the vice regent. A lot of people are flocking towards him in the hope of getting something out of him. De'bal is horrified lest Imam Raza should think that he is one among those people who have come to see him for this purpose. And he says, "Please take this back, please send this back, please just give me one of your garments, your jubba, your thob, that the long shirt that was worn and is still worn in Arab societies. Please give me one of those. That's all that I seek. No matter how old or ordinary it may be, that is what I value." Imam Raza signals to his servant, and he brings a jubba as well. And then Imam Raza insists and commands De'bal to accept both things. Once again, De'bal tries to return the coins and keep the jubba. But Imam Raza tells him that you will need this very soon.
Please, whatever
So we see this series of mourning ceremonies and commemoration of Karbala, because much of this qasida actually pertains to the events of Karbala being carried forward from one Imam to the other. Just by way of a footnote, when De'bal finally returned back to his hometown in the Arabian Peninsula, he found that in his absence, his house had been robbed and emptied of all its contents. And at that time, all that he had left with him were these 100 gold coins, which had been given to him by Imam Raza, and he had told him that you will soon need these coins, and that's why you should keep them. And he was able to then sell these gold coins at a very high price because they carried the name of Imam Raza, and there were many lovers of the Ahlul there who were willing to buy those gold coins at an exorbitant price without being asked to. They offered and insisted on paying a very high price so that they could get these coins and keep them with themselves. So this is what we're doing here tonight and in the following nights, and gatherings similar to these in this part of the world, all over the world. Whether we look at them from a geographical perspective, we find that they are part of a very large and expansive phenomenon all over the world, in different languages, in different forms. We see people commemorating the momentous events of Karbala. And even when we look at ourselves in the mirror of history, we see that what we are doing today has its roots centuries ago in the household, in the holy household of the Prophet and of the Imams themselves. So it may be so that our lives are busy, many of our colleagues, friends, neighbors, etc., they're leading their lives normally these days. Sometimes it makes us wonder that, all this that we are doing, meeting here these evenings, etc., is it really worth it? Maybe this thought may enter our minds. And when we look at this, our connection to a very, very large and enormous phenomenon, we find it easy to overcome these occasional doubts and stay grounded and convinced about the weightiness and the gravity of what it is that we are engaging in. Now, when we look at this large event or this large phenomenon that we are a part of today and in the subsequent nights, we see that there are many changes that come about in our routine. Many changes that come about in our routine. For example, in these days, many of us, we take leave for part of the day. Some come back home early from work. If we have shops and businesses, close them early. In many parts of the world, we know that people actually migrate for 10 days back to their hometowns. There are people who fly across continents just for a week or so, or a few days. People dress differently. People behave differently with more gravitas and more weight. There is less laughter and there is more grief. There are a lot of changes. And these changes, these programs, these events, they extract a cost from us. It is an effort. Man is such that man is always comfortable with his own routine. Any human being, once he has set his life has acquired a routine, doesn't want to easily change his routine. Perhaps this imposes financial costs on us. Maybe we have to complete our work and our assignments in a shorter period of time. It brings stress. But yet it is something that we do. And we do, and a lot of other people do. Everybody who engages in the commemoration of Karbala, we see that his routine changes and he lives his life differently. Now one may ask a question, why do we do this? Why do we change our routines and our way of living? Why do we incur costs of different kinds? Why do we put up with all this? it's not really necessary. Some people are of the opinion that we do this because we believe that this is a sure, short method of having our sins forgiven. And we have these ahadith which testify to this fact, that participation in these morning ceremonies, grieving for the Ahl Bayt, in particular grieving and mourning for Imam Hussain alayhi salam, does have this effect. So there is no doubt that one of the consequences and the benefits of participation in these ceremonies and these gatherings and these events is the forgiveness of our sins. But there is a difference between something acquired as a benefit and between something being the goal of an activity. I can confidently say that if each of us were informed by Jibreel himself that our sins will not be forgiven even if we come here, we will all come here. All of us can peek into our hearts and ask ourselves that if for some reason we were told that no, this is not going to happen, no sins will be forgiven, the fact is that they are forgiven. But let's assume that if we were told that none of them are forgiven, would we stop coming to these ceremonies? Would we stop holding and these gatherings? So we know the answer to this is negative. This may be one of the benefits of coming here, but this is not the primary cause and motivation that is drawing us here. Similarly, some people say that, oh, this is the way that the Shia socialize, and this is their way to meet each other. And well, it's true, this is socialization, meeting with each other is one of the benefits of these gatherings and these events. But the fact of the matter is there are much better ways of socializing if we wanted to simply socialize. There are so many different kinds of events that can be held, engineered specifically for the purpose of socialization. Why would we pick this particular form and format with all its grief and crying, which is not so conducive to gathering and getting to know each other? The cause, when we are seeking the cause that brings about this change in us and millions of other Muslims all over the world, and a certain number of non-Muslims as well, I may add, it has to be sought somewhere else. It has to be sought somewhere else. Now, I don't claim to completely understand the cause and causes that lead to this important and enormous phenomenon. It is something which is far bigger than I am for me to be able to understand it entirely, but there is something that can help us decipher it at least partially. There is a famous narration recorded from the Holy Prophet, Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, wherein he proclaims, Inna liqatlil Hussain hararatan fi qulubil mu'minin. Certainly, the murder, the assassination of Hussain has created a heat, or let me say passion, in the hearts of mu'minin. Lan tabrada abada. A passion and a heat that will never subside, that will never cool down. Dear brothers and sisters, dear mu'mineen wa mu'minat, it is perhaps this reality, this passion that exists in our heart, this passion that makes our lips quiver with grief even if we are to simply hear the name Hussein, that draws us to these gatherings as participants, as organizers. There is a kind of unease that exists in the hearts of Mu'mineen, this desire to somehow do something when it is associated with Karbala, when it is associated with Hussein, to somehow be a part of something, to somehow contribute. It is something that all of us can feel in ourselves, perhaps to a small degree, or perhaps as we approach the day of Ashura, we will sense it growing within ourselves. And this is no credit to me or any other speaker. This is the natural order of things. We will see this and sense it growing in ourselves as we come closer to Ashura. This growing unease, this growing desire to do something and more and more and more. It is this driving force that is leading us to engage in these activities and in this, to be a part of this large global and historical phenomenon. At its basic level, it gets us to attend these ceremonies. It grows a little further, we want to contribute to these ceremonies. It grows further, we want to organize these ceremonies. It grows further, these ceremonies and these gatherings are not enough anymore. We want to do something for Hussein in other spheres of life. We have people who are educating kids from underprivileged families in the name of Hussein. We have people who are spending enormous amount of time, energy, and if they have it, money as well, in propagating the values and the message of Karbala beyond these gatherings, among those who don't come to these gatherings, and much more. As this unease grows within us, its manifestation in our behavior in different spheres of our life will grow accordingly. And this is a situation and a condition that can eventually reach a point where we can speak of it as a culture by itself. As of now, when we participate in these events and these morning ceremonies, we are participating in a cultural activity. But if this extends further, and that unease and that desire to be engaged with Hussein and Karbala breaks beyond the barriers of these few hours, these few days, and begins to become a part of our existence and every aspect of our existence, be it Muharram or be it any other month, be it these gatherings of the Mu'mineen or any other place, we can sense that this culture is beginning to flower and is beginning to take its rightful place in our lives and in our society. And inshallah, in the coming nights, what I'm hoping to do is, with your help and with the help of our Imam, is to engage in a discussion and shed further light on this Husseini culture. What constitutes this culture? What are its driving elements? What are the different forms that it can manifest itself in? What are the horizons that can be kept in mind for a culture such as this? And inshallah, hopefully, we will be able to have a useful conversation and discussion on this. Tonight, it is common to recite the Masaib related to the farewell of Imam Hussein from Medina. In many parts of the world, it is a tradition to recite these and to commemorate these Masaib, and we shall be doing the same. But before we actually do that, I think it is important to also keep in mind the situation in which Imam Hussein found himself during those times. Dear brothers and sisters, when Imam Hussein was pushed into this difficult situation, which eventually led him to leave Medina, Imam Hussein had already been Imam for 10 years. He had already been Imam for 10 years. He had been Imam for 10 years at a time when the Islamic lands were ruled by Yazid's father. Yazid's father was not a nice person at all, but he was a clever person. He understood that he needs to keep an eye on Hussein and his activities, but he should avoid confronting Hussein. Imam Hussein alayhi salam understood as well that the present situation, the present socio-political situation of the Islamic world at that time required that Imam Hussein should avoid active and open confrontation with the usurper. There should be quiet rejection of this illegitimate rule and ruler, but there should not be any open confrontation because the conditions do not allow for it. And therefore, these 10 years of Imamat, in comparison to the few weeks that are associated with the event of Karbala, these 10 years of Imamat, we hardly have any reports related to them. Because whatever happened, whatever efforts were being made by Imam Hussein to pursue his grandfather's mission and to take it forward, were being done on a low-key level, without any open confrontation. And that is why they have not been recorded in any remarkable way in historical records, except for a few hints here and there. But Karbala, that was totally different, and which is why it has been so well recorded. When Yazid's father, Muawiyah, he passes away, he is succeeded by Yazid. In fact, Yazid had been appointed as his successor by Muawiyah. Muawiyah, just like his father, is not a nice man at all. There is nothing good about Yazid at all, just like his father. But there is a big difference between Yazid and his father in one aspect. Yazid is not a clever man. And therefore, he makes the mistake that his clever father was able to avoid for 10 years. He provokes an open confrontation with Imam Hussein. He sends a letter to the governor of Medina, Walid ibn Utbah, and demands that bay'ah or allegiance must be taken from Hussein at all costs. Bay'ah, allegiance is demanded from Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein refuses. Imam Hussein refuses. Now Imam Hussein alayhi salam finds himself in a very delicate position. He finds himself in a very delicate position. Over the last 50 years since the passing away of the Holy Prophet, till this day, the Muslim world has been transformed. With the beginning of the Islamic movement at the hands of the Holy Prophet, the gates of guidance had been thrown wide open. And a very large number of people had entered into Islam and into peace in a very, very short period of time. But with the passing away of the Prophet, there was an effort to close these gates, and these efforts were to a large degree successful. The gates, however, were not closed entirely. It was still left ajar slightly. But in no way were they wide open as they were during the life of the Holy Prophet. Now the situation was such that if somebody very seriously sought out guidance and truth, he would find it. He would find it in Medina, in the form of Hassan, in the form of Hussein, in the form of this holy family. But this holy family was relatively isolated. That was what the situation was like. It was still possible to seek guidance, but with difficulty. With difficulty. Now Yazid is making a demand of Imam Hussein, which if accepted by Imam Hussein, will lead to these gates being shut firmly. Will lead to these gates being shut firmly. Yazid, from the day, in fact, even before he became the Khalifa, while he was the vice regent and the prince, he was famous for his moral turpitude and his corruption. He was a famous, for example, drinking alcohol was simply one of the things that he was famous in the Islamic lands for. It's not something that became famous after he became Khalifa. And now this person who is famed for being a criminal in the eyes of Islam is demanding that the last holder of the flame of Islam, the one who is managing to keep these gates open, even if just a little bit, should now openly pledge allegiance to him and declare that, yes, I accept you as the rightful successor of the Prophet of Islam. Imam Hussein knows and understands that if he does this, the gates will be shut. The gates will be shut. In any part of the Islamic lands, and the Islamic lands were very, very vast by that time, whoever thinks of seeking guidance, whoever thinks of taking the path of truth and confronting the path of evil will be forced to answer this question. And the question was a very difficult one, would be a very difficult one. He would have to answer this question: if Hussein ibn Ali can accept Yazid as his master, why can't you? And this is a question that no one can answer. No one can answer. And this effectively means the shutting of the gates of guidance. So this is the situation that Imam Hussein finds himself in at that time. He has to do something to keep these gates open, and in fact to open them even wider than they had been forced into. If he accepts this demand and gives in to this demand, we know what's going to happen. If he rejects it and stays in Medina, he will be assassinated. He will be assassinated, and the word of his assassination will not be allowed to spread in its correct form. His assassination will be attributed to X, Y, Z, personal enmity, etc., etc. If he escapes from Medina, in the dead of the night, for example, once again, he will be playing or contributing towards shutting the gate, because cowardice will be attributed to him and his family. So he is faced with this very difficult position. Accept allegiance, it leads to shutting the gates. Stay there, assassination, the gates are shut in some other way. Escape, once again problem. And which is why Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam at that point decides that the only correct option for him as an imam is to leave Medina, but to leave it openly. In the day, in daylight, declaring his rejection, moving from the level of quiet rejection and avoidance of confrontation into a different level, which is that of open rejection, because the situation has changed. And this is an important lesson for us as followers. We need to be able to judge the situation at different times to be able to determine our own responsibility. Imam Hussein, for 10 years, avoided any kind of open rejection and open confrontation with the usurping powers. And therefore now he has to leave Medina. He has to leave Medina, dear brothers and sisters. But how shall he leave Medina? Medina is the city that he's grown up in. Hussein doesn't know any other home except for Medina. Every lane, every corner of Medina carries memories. This is where he would hold his grandfather's finger and go to the masjid. This is the path that he used to take. The same masjid where his grandfather was once leading the prayers, and while he was in sujood, Hussein sat upon his shoulder, and the Holy Prophet extended his sujood so that he would not disturb Hussein. This is the Medina that he has to leave. The Medina where his blessed mother would cradle him in her arms and put him to sleep as a child. How is Hussein to leave this Medina? But leave he must. He knows, he understands what his duty is. He knows what his Lord wants from him. But before leaving, he must bid goodbye. He must bid goodbye to the holy grave, the grave of the Holy Prophet. Sheikh Saduq in Al-Amali has narrated the incident of bidding farewell and adieu to the grave in this manner. He writes that Imam Hussain alayhi salam went towards the grave, and he sensed that a kind of light began to emanate from the grave of the Holy Prophet. Now, I don't know what happened. The narration doesn't mention it either. But Imam Hussain alayhi salam stepped back and went back home. Perhaps he realized that this goodbye is not going to be an ordinary one, and he needs to prepare himself emotionally to be able to handle it. He came back the second night, and he stood next to the holy grave, and he began to pray, salat, namaz. And it was a lengthy prayer. He went into sujood, he prostrated, and his sujood was so lengthy that he dozed off. He dozed off. And the narration says, فَرَأَى وَجَاءَهُ النَّبِي فِي مَنَامِهِ. The Holy Prophet appeared while he was asleep. Appeared in his dream while he was asleep. فَأَخَذَ الْحُسَيْنُ وَضَمَّهُ إِلَىٰ صَدْرِهِ. The Holy Prophet held Imam Hussein to his chest, held him close to his chest. وَجَعَلَ يُقَبِّلُ بَيْنَ عَيْنَيْهِ. And the Holy Prophet began kissing Hussein on his forehead, repeatedly kissing Hussein upon his forehead. It is as if it is 50 years back in the past once again. Hussein is a small child, and the Holy Prophet is holding him, kissing him, playing with him. But of course, dear Mu'mineen, the situation has changed completely. Hussein is no longer a child, and this is no longer child's play anymore. The Holy Prophet says to Imam Hussein, Ya Hussein, bi abi anta, كَأَنِّي أَرَاكَ مُرَمَّلًا بِدَمِكَ. Hussein, what has happened to you? It is as if I see you swathed and bathed in your own blood. Imam Hussein and the Holy Prophet, their meeting in this dream continues on. It continues on. Sheikh Saduq narrates further that the Holy Messenger says to Imam Hussein, Ya Bunayya, O my beloved son, your father, Ali ibn Abi Talib, your mother, Fatima, your brother, Hassan, they are all eagerly awaiting you. They are all eagerly awaiting you. Imam Hussein replies, he says, Oh grandfather, take me with you. Take me with you. I don't want to go back. It has been decades. It has been decades since I saw you. It has been years since I saw my parents and my brother. If they are waiting for me, take me with you. But the reply comes, The reply comes, no Hussein, you have a duty to perform. فَإِنَّ لَكَ دَرَجَاتٌ فِي الْجَنَّةِ لَا تَنَالُهَا إِلَّا بِالشَّهَادَةِ. Oh Hussein, there are for you stations in heaven, stations that can never be attained except through shahadat and martyrdom. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah al-ali al-azim. Saya'lamu alladhina zalamu ayya munqalibin yanqalibun.